what has he not been teaching? Um, I think that when you make that decision and you decide to say, well, God, I'm willing to be a disciple. I'm willing to follow Jesus, to follow in his footsteps. I think we don't realize like the full steps of it. So we see Jesus when he's calling out to Simon, which is later Peter and then Andrew, and he says, come and see, right? And then, as things start to progress closer to his crucifixion, he said, if anyone wants to be my disciple, they need to grab their cross and follow. I'm obviously paraphrasing all of this, but I think that that the essence of it is there, where you eventually have to walk the path of the Christ. And walking the path of the Christ is understanding that you are in submission, that you are leading into obedience, and that obedience will ultimately build character. And so you're going to have to learn a couple of things to get that character to kind of kick in. And but that character is important. It's a hard-earned thing, but it makes you fruitful in the fruit of the Spirit. It makes you fruitful in patience and faith. And so to answer that question, if I had to define right now, I've been growing a lot more in faith, and I've been growing a lot more in patience. And in the midst of it, I've also been trying to figure out how to trust in the things that God has given me. And this is kind of a separate thing from what I just mentioned, but I think we all, as human beings, we have certain struggles. And so the Lord's always going to try to push us out of those struggles, turn our weaknesses into strengths. But I think I've come from a season where I've been on two sides of the same coin. And one side is where I realize that there are gifts and talents that I have, and I'm very aware of them, and that awareness can be bad too, because then it's like, well, I'm just trusting in this, and then there's a pride that grows from it, a hubris. And then I've come from a season where now I'm looking at the stuff that I have, these gifts and these talents that I was once very aware of. I'm still aware of them, but now I'm asking myself, is this enough? And they're two faces of the same coin, because one side says, I'm really awesome, I'm really good, and I don't need Jesus. And then the other side of it is, well, everything that God gave me when he made me, when he formed me, that's not enough. And they both lead you away from God. And it's understanding that, and it's also learning to trust in myself. So there has been a great deal of knowledge and a great deal of saying, God, well, how can I be in that perfect equilibrium? And how can I learn to, can I be confident in myself because I know that you're with me? And how can I also make sure that, it's because of you, and it's finding that middle ground where you're both humble, but you're also hungry. I don't want to sound like I'm criticizing the current establishment, because I do have a great deal of respect for pastors who they'll go and they'll invest their time and their money into studying ministry and theology, and then graduating as a minister, and then finding positions at churches so that they can be the pastor of said organization, and I have nothing against that. Like I believe that is necessary, but on a very personal level, I think that one of the things that I will say is that I'm not sure if how healthy it can be to see ministry as a job. I'm not sure I can say that, and this will only apply to me. So I don't want this to come across as something that could be offensive. But in the way I currently see things and the way that I'm feeling it, is that they are not the same things. And when I look at Peter and I look at a lot of the OG apostles, right? The word apostle gets thrown around a lot too, and but I look at the OG ones, like they gave up their jobs for ministry, and yes, there was this level of sustainability, But right now in 2025, at the time of recording this video, I think we're in a society where we're comfortable, right? So I think we like our commodities and everything. So, I, I think at some point you see these pastors who they're career pastors, and their churches aren't doing well. And so we saw this a lot in the pandemic, and they were struggling. And now we have these pastors who are these career pastors who are not happy at their jobs. And you can say just really easily that way, they're not happy at their jobs, and they're not performing, and because they're unhappy. And so, but they don't know what else to do because that's what they went to school to do and everything. And so, they didn't, there wasn't this solid plan for, what do I do in case I don't want to pastor anymore, right? And so, and that's a hard thing. So for me, I think it's been really important to understand that as I'm walking into a season where I'm starting to pastor a church and pastor ministry, I've made up my mind that my financial activity and the way that I earn my money is outside of the church. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I never want to be a burden to the church. I want to bless it. And then the other thing is that because I'm in a church planting position, we could talk about, like, for today's standards, a really, right now for a family of three, $3,600 a year not 3,600, sorry, 3,600 a year, isn't really a lot of money in today's inflation and today's standards. And then you see these, and then you look at that money, but then I look at that could fund so many other things, right? That could fund, for the church, a proper person to come and help me and to me direct the children's area, which is a tough area on a part-time status, right? That could help me. That could help me fund a lot of things, right? That could be, there's just so many things that money represents that for me, it's not going to cut it, but that for the church, that could bless it extremely in this growing process. So relieving the church of the idea of, like, okay, I need to sustain Pastor Anthony, right? Is something that to me makes a lot of sense. And so this is why I don't expect anything from the church. And I think when it comes to the point where it's grown and where it's to a point where everything is in a really good place, and then it's taking so much of my time that I have to stop doing external activities, then it makes a lot of sense to say, well, then the church is going to bring me on. Mm. But I don't know how outrageous this is, but I am the head pastor of a campus church, and I'm a volunteer. Forgiveness is, I think this is one of the most underrated topics that we could ever mention in the church. And I think that forgiveness, as Jesus taught it, he was really out of the box. And really out of the box even till today's standards, because it just makes no sense when someone tells you love your enemies, right? It makes no sense to say, if they hit you on one side of your face, then, make sure they have a good angle at the next side, right? That makes no sense. It makes no sense to say, when he said, how many times should you forgive? When he said this to Peter, he said 70 times 7. And in Jewish culture, that was kind of just a saying, right? Just to say, never stop, right? It just never ends. You're supposed to always forgive, always forgive, always forgive. And I think that one of the core reasons why Jesus told us that we're supposed to forgive is less about how it makes other people feel. And I think that it was less about relieving someone. And I think this is why people are so apprehensive on the subject of forgiveness, is because they feel like that if they forgive someone, they're doing them a favor. And they feel like that they're showing grace to them. And you are definitely, that might set someone else free and relieve a burden. But I think that the person that stands to gain the most of it is the person who's offended, that's forgiving. Now, connecting to my personal story, I've grown in an environment where I'm coming from being part of a large scale organizational church. And so, you're bound to see or have these scenarios where the human element is going to start to play in. And as humans, we're all just going to fail at some point. And I could probably come off right now in this video as a nice guy, but there's areas where I'm not such a nice guy, right? And my humanity will come to play in my personality, the way that I was wired, and I am bound to offend someone. If you weren't offended by some stuff I said before, you might be offended by something I'm going to say later on in this interview, right? But the point is that we're all not perfect, right? And I think that it's just really easy to lose sight that we will ourselves be offended at some point. So I have been hurt, I have been offended. A lot of it has come from ignorance, a lot of it has come from human nature. Some of it too has been from other people's ambitions or even being taken advantage of. And so I'm no stranger to any of these things, but I've understood that forgiveness plays an important part in this role and in this future, because when I forgive someone, I'm setting myself free. We're so easily frozen in time, and those moments of like offense and those moments where we're hurt, we live in it, and you can live in it daily. And I've been in these moments where I've just walked in something, and I wake up every day, I hear someone, I'll see the person on TV, or I'll see them in social networks, and I'll see them living their lives, and then and you're like in this moment where you see them and you can't stand to see them. And how awful is that? Because then all of a sudden you've let this situation just hijack your day. You've let this situation just hijack your life. You let it hijack your calling and the stuff that you're supposed to do. And even speaking into some of the stuff I said before, learning to understand that God gave you like these very specific things, and that He's given them to you so you understand that you are enough and that you have everything that you need to be successful in your calling and in your purpose. You also have to understand that you can't let something like that freeze you in time, because that will hinder you from walking forward into what God wants you to do. And so when you forgive other people, that forgiveness, more than showing grace to them, is just saying, I'm ready to move on. I'm ready to unfreeze myself. I'm ready to pull myself out of the freezer, and I'm ready to say, I'm ready to take the next step. And so it's inhuman to say that you can forgive and forget, because you will never forget. But at least when you see this person on social networks, when you see this person when you go to work, when you see this person when with someone else, or you see them on TV or whatever, whoever you're offended at, you just won't feel that anymore, and you'll be able to walk forward. And so that part of it is super important. And I think that we also have to understand the other side of it too, is that you don't have to become best friends with that person when you forgive them, because there is a potential that God is working in their humanity, and they haven't overcome these things. But you can take a healthy distance where you don't feel anything against this person, you love on them, you're willing to sit down and have a coffee with them, but I guess maybe you're not willing to do the stuff that you would do before. You're not willing to go bowling with them anymore, or go and get manicures together, or stuff like that. Like stuff that's a little more intimate, or invite them into your house, which I believe that that's still a very personal area. Like come over for dinner or anything like that. Maybe you're not willing to do that anymore, but you can see them, you can hug them, you can love on them, you can have a conversation with them. That is absolutely important, because that will set you free. That will set you free, and that will help you get past those really difficult situations, and that will help you move forward in your life, and you won't live in a captivity. And a lot of believers live in Stockholm syndrome. So Stockholm syndrome is when you fall in love with your captors, right? And you can easily fall into this Stockholm syndrome where you're in love with being hurt, and you're in love with unforgiveness, and you're in love with this, and you won't let it go. And so you need to forgive so that you can move on and be healthy as a believer. Okay, so my story in music production goes back to, I think it's generally gone like in stages. So when I was in middle school, and I hit sixth grade, the school that I was in was a magnet school, and so I grew up with a lot of very bright people, and they had this program in sixth grade where you were allowed to just check out some of like the programs that they had, and so they had one that was for law, and I did that one, and I absolutely loved it. I loved the idea of, so when I was in sixth grade, this version of Anthony said, I want to be a lawyer, right? And I'm really great at reading. I'm really great at investigating, about understanding systems and things like that. Like that's how I was wired. And if you're into the Enneagram, I'm a 5, so it would make a lot of sense, right? And but I remember that same year I was taken to my very first like worship concert. I saw the artist that was on the stage. So I grew up in a Latin community church, and so maybe like the equivalent to someone like Michael W. Smith in our church was Marcos Witt. And Marcos Witt, it was the first time I see him live, and I see him. He's playing keys, he's singing, he's doing a great job. And then he walks off the keyboard. He sits on a stand, pulls out a pocket Bible, right, and he gives this amazing sermon about, and I remember it like really, really well. He gives this amazing sermon about, deciding to be a radical Christian and just living in holiness and walking in holiness. And when that message hit me that day, I remember seeing him and I say, that's what I want. And I not just the message, but like I was looking at him and saying, this is very inspiring, and this is what I aspire to be called to do. So the long story short is I started shifting gears into trying to learn piano, and this is me, like 10 years old, 11 years old, but I really wanted to. And so I started learning piano. We couldn't afford a teacher, but God was providing people that were kind of giving information. And so I remember we had to move with my family to a low income area from where we were, because we were struggling. And so I wasn't in that magnet school anymore. So because I moved, I couldn't continue to go there. And so we're at this low income school, and but they had a music program, and the music teacher was really loving, and he saw that I was hungry for it. So he decides to give me free lessons on the side, and all I had to do was give up my lunch break. I gave up my lunch break every day for that, and I got into playing the piano, and that's how I started. I went to school for music, and I was doing after school things that I got scholarships for, and I was doing Saturday programs and doing a lot of things as I was going through high school, and so when I started realizing that if I went to school for music, the career was only gonna really push me into being able to just teach, I decided that I didn't want to become a school teacher. I didn't want to become like a college teacher or anything. So I went to a school that's not there anymore. They closed in 2017, but back then it was called the Institute of Audio Research in New York City. And so I went there for audio recording engineering, but that's how I got really involved in the idea of music production. And I was really excited about it. I was super excited about it. So that's how I got into music production. And the way it starts growing is that this is the way a lot of these stories go in the church. The church has a band. We decide, we want to start doing records. We want to start doing things. They have the funding. They have everything. And then since I was the most knowledgeable, I was the volunteer back then that they were using. And we were part of, we had a couple of worship band projects that came from the church. And they started growing. One of them, which was the most notable one, was one called Generación 12. And a lot of things that in these in this industry and in everything is that we start as just the church band, and it just started growing very fast. And as it started growing very fast, it stopped being this thing that was like within the church, and it started becoming, okay, we figured out a lot of things. We figured out that we can also make money, and we figured out that this is also a business, and that and in the beginning you think good stewardship is like, okay, well, being a good steward is that we're being productive and we're making money off of this, and so it starts like that. So a lot of my career started being a volunteer in the church until it started growing into something that was influential in the market. And we were nominated for awards in the Doves specifically. I think we were nominated twice for Best Spanish Language Album of the Year. We won it the second time, and that was at that point that was probably, what's that? That would have been my like third or fourth Dove nomination as a producer. I've won 2 Dove awards since I've had my music career, and it started as just something serving in the church, and then it became something that just started growing a lot. And then you start making friends in the industry, and you start connecting with different areas, and you start realizing that music is a business, and that it can be a business that that can help you do well. So I started growing in the market, and till today I'm still actively part of the music industry. I think that there's a lot of things that can rob you of the purity of like what we're doing. And I think that the best way to describe this is when Jesus sees the children running towards him, and the disciples are like, no, 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 you can't go. And he's like, no, let them come, because they're the ones that are going to inherit the kingdom of heaven. And it's just that childlike purity that, and as I say this, it's sad, because it's something that weighs very heavy on my soul, but it's so easy to lose it. And it's so easy to lose I mean, I remember showing up to church for rehearsals, and I mean, we sounded bad, right? We sounded pretty bad for my standards today. But we were just so hungry for God, and we were just so happy to serve him. And then I think it starts with little things. I think it starts with you being recognized, and it starts with that small offering. Hey man, I felt from the Lord that you could use this. And then when you're young, you take that money and you say, well, I'm going to buy some strings, or I'm going to buy some drumsticks, or I'm going to buy that pedal that I wanted. And it's all for that, right? It's all like, just continue doing it. And then it starts going from that occasional offering to like, okay, you're making money, right? And you're actually making this, and this is what's paying your bills, and it starts growing. And as it starts growing, it starts becoming something regular, normal, clandestine. And then at that point, it's just like, well, what was I doing this for in the beginning? You start losing that young version of you that just wants to do it because you love the Lord. And I started realizing in my own sense and in my own journey that people were asking me if I could join them and help them. And there were some occasions where I was just trying to figure out if the value of doing it was there, and I'd say no. So I felt like it wasn't there. And then it starts with also, you start losing your interest to serve in the church. So you're kind of looking you're looking for the angle, and you're like, well, where's my cut, or where's what I'm supposed to get? And then it just starts growing and growing. And then, those recognitions start coming into, and you're like, well, now I'm a professional in the industry. And then in the industry itself, the industry is not a friendly place. And unfortunately, we listen to the music and we listen to the songs, and there's a lot of beautiful stories behind them, and the majority of them. But there's also an industry that's looking to be marketable, that's looking to make money. And they're measuring things. They're looking at analytics, and they're looking at people, and they're looking at, so what is Gen Y, Gen Z? Now they're thinking, what does Gen Alpha want? Like, what do they want to listen to? What's important to them? What has vibes, right? And is that what the kids are saying today? And so they're all looking at these things. They're trying to figure out, how do we market this? How do we make money? And then you understand when when it becomes very apparent that Scripture is true when it says that the root of all evil is the love of money. And money's an important tool. Resources are an important tool of any kind. Resources and influence, resources and friendships, and obviously monetary resources. They're super important. You need them to keep the lights on, and you need them to be able to provide a future for families and etc. But when you start loving the idea of making money, when you start realizing that there's a point where you're making money and it's not enough, and it's still not enough, and it stops being enough, and you just need more and more. And then when money stops being important, where that influence that you carry starts being even more important, then it just becomes very dangerous. And so I like someone said this in a book that I read, that said that influence was something that was important, but you had to hold influence really tight with a gun to its head. And the moment that it starts to kind of get out of your hands, you need to pull the trigger and let it go. And so that's the part of it that's just it's sad, because it's so easy to lose that childlike innocence and that purity in why you're doing it. And there's a part of me that's trying to find this way back to the version of Anthony that was just excited about going and worshiping. It was excited about going to church and playing. And I'm genuinely asking God, and I'm saying, God, I think as David wrote, like, God, like, search me, like, search my soul, search my heart. Like, if there's something wrong, please let me know, make me aware, and essentially for him to bring me back to him, and to that purity, that innocence. And the industry, the industry in that sense has brought out, some things that I'm not particularly excited about or happy about or proud of. But I really just want to go back to just, doing stuff for the Lord, and doing it out of purity, and taking on projects that that I feel his hand on and that I'm excited about. And yes, there still needs to be compensation. I don't think lawyers represent people for free, and they do some pro bono stuff, but they still have to keep the lights on. I still have to keep the lights on too. But I want to be able to have flexibility in projects, and maybe focus less on the impact that it's going to have in my wallet, and more on the impact, how is this going to bless the body of Christ? So I'm currently there, and I don't think I've figured it out yet. I think the first thing I would tell that version of Anthony would be to really lean into forgiveness, to remember that inherently the people that are around me aren't bad people, but what's been influencing them is, and that it's okay for me to remember that he was the one who chose me. And something that really speaks to me, and I think I always go back to this, is just David's heart. Now, this is the man that God says, my heart's after him, and he chose him so that through his lineage Jesus would come. Even from before, because when Jacob blesses Judah, this is the line of Judah, and he's prophesying the coming of Jesus through that. So he's there, right? And but it's through David's lineage specifically, and I look at David, and he was criticized. His brothers didn't really like him. Even his dad kind of tried to hide him. Like, he wasn't the interesting one. But then you see him being anointed, despite that. Then you see a David that's insulted by the fact that the Philistines are rising up against him, and Goliath is rising up against him, and okay, I'm going to fight them. And he takes on this huge task that he is, totally unprepared for. and they're trying to offer him swords and the king's armor. And you got to understand, the king always has the best of the best. So he's going to have the sharpest sword. He's going to have the best armor. And he just looks at all this and he's like, nah, it just doesn't fit. And he's just like, this isn't for me. And he just goes and he grabs what he already knows. He goes to the river. He grabs he grabs the right stones for his sling, and he fights the giant with the tools he already has, with what he already has. And I feel like that people lose sense of like what you've been given, what God has given you. That's gonna be enough. Like if you feel like everyone else is fighting with swords and armors and spears and javelins, and then you look at yourself and you think you're just holding a sling and a couple of rocks. Well, that sling and couple of rocks that you have, like that's what God will use, right? That's what God will use, and that is enough. So the version of me that was coming back to the U.S., I would probably tell him, what you have is enough. And the fact that you're unique or you're different doesn't mean that you're subpar or that you're less than anyone else. Because just the fact that God smiles upon you and that little bit of God's grace, like just a tablespoon of it, can be enough, more than enough, way more than enough. So I would tell myself back then, regardless of what anyone says or how they feel or whatever actions they take, just remember that, that I was anointed, I was called, I was chosen, I was singled out in my field, I was singled out in my calling, and everything that I have, that is enough because it came from the Lord.